Welcome everybody, it's Ben Reedy here, founder and managing editor of MBA News Australia. Welcome to our semi-regular webinar catch-ups where we discuss all things MBA. Today we are joined by fashion entrepreneur and UQ MBA graduate Jessie Sadler to have a chat about her startup and how her studies contributed to its success. Welcome Jessie, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks Ben, nice to be here.
That's all right. Before we move on discussing your MBA, tell us a little bit about your business, Christina Stephens, and how it came about.
Sure. So Christina Stephens is an adaptive clothing label for women with disabilities or changing bodies. We launched in March 2020, right at the start of COVID lockdowns in Brisbane. And so that was an interesting time to launch a business. But we've had a really good record of success in the last 18 months. And the seed or the concept for the business came from a personal experience about 5 years ago. My mother and I were doing a shop on James Street in Brisbane, and she tripped and had a fall and smashed both of her elbows. She's a very health conscious, fashion conscious lady, and was struggling to dress herself and find clothing that was she felt good wearing or felt fashionable in. And so when we were looking online and less so in bricks and mortar stores, we weren't finding much at all to her liking. And so I started doing some sketches and talking to other women around her age, and that's how the business came about.
Did you have a background in fashion? What's your career before Christina Stephens?
No background in fashion other than a love of it. My background in the last 10 years is oil and gas, and that was the sector I was in while I was doing the MBA at UQ. So a lot of short courses, a lot of bought-in talent, and a lot of quick learnings to get the business off the ground, which has been really fun and exciting.
Big transition from high vis to high fashion.
Something like that.
So you completed your UQ MBA in 2016. How did the MBA help you to create and do the launch strategy for Christina Stephens?
I think the biggest takeaway for me out of the MBA was just an injection of business confidence, that I came out with the skills or the networks or the contacts to know where to go to start putting a strategy together. The coursework was fabulous, so I can quite diligently read a P&L and a balance sheet and put a marketing report together. But the best bit about the MBA was the networks and the friends that you develop, so people that you can go to while you're trying to pull ideas together and test different ideas out on. I also did an out-of-coursework lean startup challenge that didn't go towards credit, but used a strategizer toolkit and methodology to understand how to test ideas and understand pain points. Pivot, very overused word, but then to come back and pivot your idea and go out and retest again. So that was definitely a toolkit that I used when pulling the strategy together. And I also was fortunate to do a consulting project as my capstone, and we went to China and worked with a Chinese group of students to do that. And fortunately, that was the right country for me to do that project in, and so learning some of the cultural considerations and obstacles that I might face now that we manufacture half our label in China. That was fortuitous, and I think collectively the MBA was an important program to help me put this business together.
So what prompted the idea of doing an MBA? What was your undergraduate studies? And you said you worked in oil and gas. Did you have an undergraduate degree? And sort of what was the trigger for doing an MBA?
Yeah, so my undergrad was in international business, commerce, and I also, prior to the MBA, had a postgrad in international law. It was really when I first started, to help climb the corporate ladder. I guess the piece of paper was probably what I was after when I initially started. And it wasn't until I think the first year in where I appreciated the other opportunities, the networks, the out-of-coursework programs that were available, that I realised it was a really rich program to be involved in, and wouldn't end up just being a piece of paper at the end.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to say that we get a lot of feedback from MBA students who, the idea of doing an MBA is something, a rubber stamp they need to progress their career, but then they end up learning so much from it. It's, the value of the education is far more important than the value of the piece of the paper at the end.
That's right. Yeah, I agree with that.
So tell us about Christina Stephens. Where did the name come from? Was that I keep wanting to call you Christina for some reason.
Yeah, I nearly have to change my name, that's for sure. It came about because when I was looking at other adaptive clothing labels that were in the market, they had very health or clinical or functional sounding names. And to me, a customer that was wanting fashion forward clothing wouldn't always want to be reminded that it was a niche category. Or reminded that there was disability or injury involved. So I wanted a name like Marc Jacob, for example, that sounded more like a designer label. And so the namesake comes from my mother, who is the Christine in Christina, and my father, who is the Stephen in Stephens.
Oh, excellent. So a great family link there as well. So is it still largely a family business? How big is it now? How much, how many pieces of clothing you're selling? How many customers do you have? That sort of stuff?
Yeah. So, we've had probably our best month last month, which aligned with new retailers coming on board, such as The Iconic. We are distributing into the UK. We're also with a few innovative niche retailers in Australia that have developed marketplaces for people with disabilities. So the likes of Every Human and the Avery Marketplace. Our customers come from Australia and New Zealand. And so July last month, we did the same unit number of sales as we did all of last year. So we've had quite exponential growth this year. And seeking to develop that market into a menswear label later this year.
Oh, excellent. And how has been, everyone's had issues with supply chains over the last 18 months. If you wanted to, you couldn't have picked a worse time to launch a fashion business, making product in China, shipping it to Australia and then off to customers. How have you handled the challenges of COVID?
Really, I didn't know how to do business prior to COVID. So that in itself was a bit of luck, and learning how to do business from that point onwards. We had all of our fabric manufactured, which is 100%, or was for our last collection, manufactured in China before the Australian lockdowns happened and the supply chain started getting bottlenecked. And we did our first manufacturing run in Australia. So we were quite lucky in that respect. The logistics of getting the product to our customers in Australia and New Zealand was the same thing that everyone was experiencing. So there was a slowdown in careers in Australia Post, and that's just a life we had to learn to live with for a short period of time. For our next collection that was released in June this year, we really didn't experience a lot of supply chain issues. We just had to be better time managed in terms of putting our orders in a bit earlier, and understanding that the production process would take a bit longer. But logistically, I think logistics companies have come a long way very quickly to help speed that process up internationally.
Yeah, and obviously managing those supply chains is a lot about planning and strategizing, and there are a lot of the skills you get from an MBA, isn't it? How many of those skills do you transfer from the MBA into the managing of the business?
I think it's not necessarily the functional or the detailed skill. I think that's something that you learn in a work situation by practicing it. But I think it's the understanding of what you or to know what you need to be considering at the outset before you get stuck in, and that's probably one of the biggest takeaways for me.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously growth is a big target of yours. How big do you think the business can get? What's the in MBA terms, what's the total addressable market?
So the global adaptive clothing market is projected to reach $400 billion in 2023. That to me seems like a large figure relative to the players that are in the market today. So I'm keen to see more information about how that would be broken down. But there's certainly a lot of room to grow. We have recently launched with the Iconic, which was fabulous. One of our founding missions was to bring adaptive clothing to the mainstream. So we've been able to achieve that within 18 months of launching. That's a really major part of our strategy to be able to position adaptive clothing in a market that is accessible by all. When I talk to people about adaptive clothing, I use maternity wear or plus size clothing and how that's come in the last 10 to 15 years and where that sits in terms of the marketplace, and that's where we need to see adaptive clothing also. So I think we're on the right path to expanding both geographically and product through our menswear line. And once we are comfortable that we've got as much as the market in Australia as we can, I'm keen to further our partnerships in the UK and the US.
Yeah. So just returning to your MBA for a minute, what were some of the what was one thing that really surprised you about the MBA that you took away from it that you didn't think you would going into the program?
I think the biggest, I keep coming back to this point, is the networks and the friendships you make. And it sounds a bit fluffy when you're about to invest $50,000 or $60,000 into a business program, but it is true. My best friend now is from the MBA, and we're bringing up our young kids together. So that's a beautiful thing in terms of emotional connections. But I also have maintained a lot of friendships where I'm able to bounce ideas off for the business. So one of my friends has also started his own business since leaving the MBA, and we went to a party a couple of months ago, and he said, you really need an advisory board mate, and this is how you might like to put it together, and this is how I did it, so that there's a lot of information sharing. Everyone's very collegiate and keen to help each other, and I think that's so valuable. That's priceless.
And now you're also a volunteer consultant for Orange Sky Australia on their international expansion program. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to be involved in a charity like that as well? They're a well-known Australian story, of course.
Yeah, they're a lovely story. And I first heard about Orange Sky Laundry when the two guys received their Australian of the Year awards. And then the opportunity came up to first mentor an undergraduate group that was working for Orange Sky Laundry to develop a workplace roster system so that the clients of Orange Sky Laundry could also had access to paid work through the organisation. So that was my first touch point to the organisation, and that was really cool, just watching different ideas and how the undergraduate students were working and just trying to keep them on track at times to deliver the scope of work, because there are a lot of very cool and outrageous ideas flying around. And then so my next introduction to Orange Sky Laundry was to work on their international expansion strategy. So they were looking to move their services into the US, and we were briefed with understanding different geographies in the US, statistics around homelessness, charities, how the different levels of government in different states worked and impacted homelessness in the US, as well as support. And so it was really a program of deduction to pick the top 3 cities that they might enter the US to operate their services. So that was, it was lots of fun. It was really energizing to be aligned with such an amazing organisation. It was young, they were agile, they were open to suggestions. There was no fuddy-duddiness to work with. And so, it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, we see a lot of people, you're moving from MBAs into that social enterprise space. It's a huge growth area. It's not just doing great for the community. It's also, a great growth area for business as well. Do you consider yourself, Christina Stephens, a social enterprise or a for-profit business?
No, we're definitely a for-profit business. It's to pay the mortgage and put food on the table. But what I did get out of the MBA as well, and through a program called SEEP, so it was the Social Economic Engagement Program that I did a couple of projects with, was that business, whether they like it or not, is having to consider multiple bottom lines, not just a single financial bottom line. So in most businesses now, there is a financial, a social and an environmental bottom line that should be considered or needs to be considered as part of regulation. And I just think that's where business is moving.
Yeah, it's just part of business now. It's not a separate part of business. It is business, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I wanted to have a chat about was the idea of career transition. The UQ MBA is big on, one of their tenets is helping people transition career, and it's been something that's really emerged over the last 18 months since COVID, is people wanting to either transition from a big business to a startup, or go from a public service to the private sector, from the private sector to the public sector, and make those big career transitions, and using the MBA as the tool to do that. Is that one of the benefits you saw, it as being able to sort of give you the confidence to transitions from a career in oil and gas to a fashion entrepreneur? Is that sort of the confidence that it gives you? Is that something you took out of the MBA?
Yeah, the confidence is key. It's I went into the MBA feeling quite nervous about the cohort that I would be studying with, about my ability, my background, and I came away from it thinking, you're all right, you're pretty good at some things and you can learn more in other areas. But confidence is a big thing, to be able to make the decisions and to know how to navigate that career change. Mine was perhaps, I was on maternity leave when I decided not to go back to oil and gas, and I think having the MBA and the bricks and toolkits that it gave me allowed me to make that decision. And I think my time away from the workplace and with my son, it gave me some breathing space to consider what I wanted to do.
Excellent. So just one final question: where do you see yourself and Christina in the next 5 years? Where do you see the business in 5 years? Global domination?
That's the number one objective. But I would really love to see the label in the likes of Myers and David Jones, so as accessible as any other genre of clothing. In parallel with that, I understand that department stores in the US are also closely looking at this category of clothing, and I think that's the large market that we would like to be part of, and that's where I'd like to see our label.
Excellent. Best of luck, Jessie. Thanks for joining us today. I hope it's been of value to the audience and learning a little bit more about your MBA experience. Thanks for joining us, Jessie.
Thanks, Ben. Lovely.